to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. My name is Tracy Shirk, and today we are chatting about how we really look at changes inside of our organization, diagnose what's going amazingly well, and what are some of those key tweaks we need to do to get the culture that we want. And with me, I have Brianna Goodwin, and Brianna is the CEO of Ver-Tex Construction. And Brianna and I have worked together for several years as coachees in some coaching programs. And one of the things I most admire about Brianna is how she can see into what individuals need and truly listen with vulnerability. And we'll chat about that as far as her success when we chat today. So Brianna, welcome.
Thanks, Tracy. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So as we kind of chat about this idea of the culture inside of our organization, I know when you took over kind of the reins of Ver-Tex, one of the things that you had to do was transition from this family-owned organization into a larger organization. What did that look like?
Yeah, so when I took over, we were still operating as a small family-run business, even though we're much larger than that. We hadn't updated our processes. We didn't have a management structure in place. I was a new leader myself. So for me, the process was really challenging, but it was learning, that balance of what made Ver-Tex really great, which is our family-oriented culture, the closeness of everybody, really close-knit community, and keeping that feel as we grew, but also while we added accountability, because there really wasn't much accountability at the time. There's a lot of really great team members, not saying that people weren't great employees and weren't contributing, but in regards to an overall culture, we did not have a culture of accountability. As we continued to grow and as I moved into leadership, it was, how do you balance those two things? How do you add accountability into your culture while still having that community of care, which was really important to me and still is as we continue to grow? How do you maintain that culture of care and grow into a larger organization?
I love how you said that, because so often when we walk into organizations and start consulting with organizations, my first question is, tell me about your business strategy. And then tell me about your business results. Are you hitting your business results? And I typically get this look that's like, yeah, well, kind of, and
right.
So then
Exactly.
I want to say yes, and I can't really, right? So the question is always, well, what is stopping you from bridging that business strategy to those business results, right?
Yep, exactly.
And it's two things typically. Hey, do we have the processes in place to hold individuals accountable, which is how much of what by when, right? Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what you just said. And do we have the right people in the right seats with this, as you talked about, this culture and community of care?
Yes, absolutely.
So I know when we were prepping for this, one of the key things you talked about was right people in the right seats. And how do you do that with accountability? So I'm so curious, what was that journey like for you?
Well, to be honest, I wish that I knew about PI back then and had a PI consultant back then. Because at the time, this is several years ago, there was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of, I would say, turmoil and chaos going on as we made these transitions. And, it wasn't just around the right people in the right seats. It was creating the right roles, creating management structure, the right management positions. We had to restructure departments. And then on top of that, we had to find, make sure the right people were in the right seats in that new structure. And so it was a challenge. And luckily we have such a great team and people took it in stride and really stuck with us while we went through those transitions. But there was, like I said, trial and error. And now knowing what I know, both based on experience and having resources that I have in regards to predictive index and other consultants, is that it's an art for sure, but there's definitely more strategy around it versus just maybe 50-50. You're, sometimes 25%, you're lucky if you get the right person, especially from a new hire that fills every part of that role that you're looking for. So, it was a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of time and energy that went into that. And, we came out on the other side, and I'd say we're pretty good at it now at identifying the right people and identifying the right roles. We involve a lot more people in those decisions. It's been a journey, and I guess my advice for anyone else going through it is to utilize your resources and don't try to do it on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about, utilizing resources and not doing it on your own, one of the things that you mentioned, I'm going to read between the lines a little bit, but what is the data that we're using to really ensure we have the right people in the right seats, that we can truly execute our strategy to get the outcomes or our business results? And we've talked about predictive index a little bit. And so for those of you that are brand new to our podcast or don't know what predictive index is, essentially predictive index is your easy button to help you optimize the talent inside your organization. Would you agree with that?
Yes, exactly.
And what it does is it actually gives you data to use for your people. So you can actually look at that data and diagnose where the issues are. And so we have data for every other metric inside of our organization, right? We've got sales data and we've got financial data, but we've never really had people data. And this gives you that people data. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things you talked a little bit about, Brianna, was that journey and the tools. You said this quote to me earlier and I loved it. And it said, I had a vision and did not know how to execute it. So I did it by sheer force versus through partnership. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you kind of learn to become in partnership with your team while using some of those tools.
Sure. All right. So that's a loaded question. So I'll try to cover all the points. So coming in as a newer leader and having the vision, and, I definitely underestimated what it would take to get there. I thought, when I first stepped into the position, I thought the vision of what was missing. And so, I have the vision. I've got it all figured out. Not realizing how much support I would need from all of my team members. Of course, I knew that I would need their support, but people don't like change. And for me, it's easy to say, change this, change that. Try to drag people along with me when I'm implementing those changes instead of actually working in partnership and looking at what needs to be changed and how it needs to be changed together with them. And then also enrolling them in actually implementing the change. So that was definitely a learning process for me. It took a few years. I guess I'm a slow learner, but I was evolving over those years, getting a lot of coaching, outside coaching, executive coaching, working on myself, reflecting on, how I'm landing, getting a lot of feedback from my team members and other people in my life on how am I landing and, what are my results and what's missing from, where's that missing piece between my intent versus the impact. And so that's been a process. I've been doing that development work for 8 years now, and I continue to do it because I think it's such a vital part to my success and the overall success of the company is to constantly be working on myself and looking at those blind spots and looking at where do I need to go next to help us get to the next level. I certainly haven't done it on my own. I've done it with the help of coaches, with the help of peers, with the help of my team members that are giving me the feedback. I'm eternally grateful for the people that are open and honest with me, giving me that feedback so I can learn and grow. Some people get worried about giving that straight feedback to the CEO. And for me, it really touches my heart when someone does, because then so much I don't know. I'm blind to so many things about how I land, and hearing that from others really helps me gain that insight and helps me work on myself. So I think I covered all the points in your question, but I mean, I didn't talk about the PI tool, which has been a huge benefit to us and a huge help, which is, again, another outside resource that I was turned on to. And once I researched it, I was like, wow, this is a game changer for us, because it does fill in that missing piece of, you have a resume. Okay, the resume looks great. You like the person's personality. I mean, that's about as much as you get from an interview. But there's certain characteristics, the behavioral characteristics that a person has and that a role requires. And you just don't know if that's the right fit until they're in the role. But with PI, you kind of take out that guesswork and you understand what their innate behavioral characteristics are, how they like to work and communicate. And you can see if that's the right fit for the role. But in particular, what I like about PI is it's not like a pass or fail. You don't just get like, oh yes, this person's right and this person's not. There's that rate, kind of like a rating system. You kind of see where they fall on a scale of right fit to a not right fit. And, someone doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 to be successful in that role. But PI gives you those guidelines for the interview questions, or for when you're moving into someone in a role. Hey, these are areas that may be a concern or an issue. These are the questions that you want to ask to see if the person can adapt appropriately. And so it's the additional resources other than just the initial output of how they fit in the role, but it's those additional resources that really help us be successful, because then we can, it's not black and white. We're very nuanced people. So it just facilitates those conversations to make sure that works for everybody before you go ahead and make that hire.
So in other words, every single one of us is created perfectly the way we are. We're not created perfectly for every role, but we can stretch at times into certain things if it's a short period of time.
Absolutely. And the example I always give about that when I talk about PI and talking about these, behavioral competencies, I grew up in my business. I've been at Ver-Tex for over 16 years. I've done a lot of the roles myself, started from the ground up. And there's some roles, like for instance, doing takeoffs, reading blueprints and putting the takeoff plan together from the plans. I could do that role no problem from a knowledge perspective. I know how to do it. I'm very capable of doing that. If you look at like the PI, I don't even know what it's called, but like that profile, the PI profile for that type of role, in my PI profile, they're literally completely opposite. Like I am not the right fit for that role. Am I capable of it? Sure, I can certainly do it. Long-term wise, I would not be happy doing a role like that. And that's something I would want to know up front before I got hired. If I was exploring different roles, like that's a role that long-term would not suit the way that I like to work, because I'm not as structured. I want more freedom. I want to be able to work at a faster pace, et cetera. So this is the feedback we get from the PI and the results from comparing the role to the person.
Yeah. And what you just said, I absolutely love, because it's essentially, will you do the job for a long period of time? And we can all do certain jobs for a short period of time, right? It's just knowing what that is. One of the things we didn't talk about, Brianna, and I'm going to kind of bring it up here, is when we look at talent pathway planning and bringing a really green, brand new college grad into where they want to grow in the organization, especially as somebody that's going to, sample all these different roles. So, hey, there's 12 roles. You're going to have a 2-year, apprenticeship program and kind of bounce seats. You're not going to be a fit for every role, but you're going to learn that overall what that looks like. And in our talent pathway planning, a lot of times we really utilize those behavioral assessments to say, guess what? To get to this role and to have that freedom, you have to understand how the job works, because the further you go up in an organization and leadership roles, you're not doing tasks anymore. You're leading people, and you have to understand intimately what those tasks are, which means you got to roll up your sleeves and do it for a short period of time.
Yes.
Awesome. So I want to just kind of do a quick bullet of what we've talked about and put this into some points, because you made so many amazing points throughout our conversation today. And one of those is, what is that vision and culture? You really started with that. We want a culture of care. We've got a vision, but guess what? We have to have some metrics and some accountability to that vision to ensure that we're actually reaching our business results. How do we do that? We're going to put a people plan in place. I know you didn't use that term, but essentially we're going to put a people plan in place to bridge that business strategy to our business results. And we have to enroll our team. And if we're not great leaders, we can learn to be great leaders with that, knowing what we can do for a long period of time and getting that right mix in place and accepting that feedback. I so love what you talked about with feedback, because it's truly a gift as long as we view it as a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there are times when it doesn't feel like a gift when it's coming at you. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we've been on giving and receiving ends of that, right?
Right.
And we learn how to give feedback in much better ways.
Yes.
And so as we kind of close out today, what's one takeaway that you have for our executive and CEO listeners?
So I would say the one takeaway for executives and CEOs is definitely in line with what I was talking about regarding feedback. is ask for feedback constantly, consistently, in many different forms and formats from all different levels of the organization. It's the only way to truly know how things are going and how you're doing. And it's the only way to know for sure, to really know what's needed in the organization and for yourself and for your growth. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me, is constantly asking, as much as it hurts sometimes to hear what you don't know or you don't want to hear necessarily, but you can tailor your business to the needs of your team members and basing, your change initiatives on that feedback, both from a personal growth perspective and from a company perspective. And so it's just being vulnerable and opening up your ears and your heart and hearing it and really taking it in and making changes accordingly.
Thank you so much for that. And it does impact your financials. When we listen to the feedback and implement some of those things that, our frontline staff hear or see that are pain points to them, it can increase production significantly because we're removing those barriers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what's one takeaway that you have for our human resource listeners and practitioners?
For me, and based on my experience as an executive and working with HR professionals, we have an HR manager at our company. There's always a tension when it comes to hiring team members. There's different agendas, I think, from different parts of the company. And, making sure our team managers and executives are aligned with the HR goals and vice versa is important. And, always keeping the focus of everyone involved in hiring on getting the right person in the right seat. Make sure it's the right person, and don't hire just because you need a body. Don't just fill a role. It's very costly, not just financially, energy wise. It definitely hinders growth, because if you're having turnover, you're not developing people long-term in their roles. It kills morale. There's just so many drawbacks to it. So taking the time to hire the right person from the get-go, might take a little bit longer on the front end, but it definitely pays off on the back end. So really working HR partners, working with their executive and manager teams on aligning on those goals and making sure the focus always stays on getting that right person in the right seat versus just or however, I like how you said it, outcome versus output of a body. That's sometimes what people hire for versus the overall outcome.
Right. And tying that outcome to what are the business results we're looking to get based on the individual in this role.
Exactly.
And then we want to make sure that they're fulfilled in their role and want to do it long term.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Brianna, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your story, and some of those key insights that our listeners can really take and run with that will impact those business outcomes for their organization. If you're interested in following Brianna and learning more about Ver-Tex, that information will be in our show notes. And by the way, if you are curious about some of the things that we do here at Elevated Talent Consulting and how we align and put in place that people strategy for your business, we have our Talent Optimization Foundation membership program also linked in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.